If you saw my recent trip to Italy, it's an important one, so I needed a great lens to take my pictures. You may have noticed in my Leica M monochrome video that I was using that camera, but what I didn't tell you was I was using the brand new Thypoch Eureka 50mm f2 lens for most of the photos. Coming up, you'll see photos with the Leica M10, Leica M11 monochrome and the Leica SL. I've been playing with this lens for quite a few weeks, so I've been using it for my workshops, for photo shoots and using it on film as well as digital. Spoiler alert, this lens is now glued to my Leica M3. This video will tell you everything you need to know about this lens, including some comparison tests to other popular 50mm lenses. If you're new here, this is my 49th 50mm lens review, so feel free to hit subscribe so not to miss future content. Hey guys, Matt here from MrLeica.com. So first, a big thanks to Thypoch for sending me this lens to test. I'm excited to finally be sharing this lens with you. This video has been a long time coming. I've had it for maybe 3 to 5 weeks. I've lost track, but it's absolutely amazing, especially on a Leica M film camera. Let's get into the video. Okay, so when taking a closer look at the Thypoch Eureka lens, we'll notice that it's very similar in its design to my 1930s Leica lenses. It's actually based on the Taylor Hobson design in terms of the outside, but it's slightly different optics wise. Here you can see it compared to more modern 50mm f2 lenses, and here you can see the height both collapsed and fully extended for use. In terms of the measurements, those are the stats on their website. Now, what about the weight? This lens feels light in the hand and it feels light on the scales too. 120 grams is just crazy light for a 50mm mount lens. It's my lightest 50mm. It's worth noting the lens I'm testing is the aluminium version. There's also the classic, which is 218 grams. If you're interested in buying the Thypoch lens, Thypoch have given me a discount code for you guys to use. It only lasts for the first month since I make the video, and there's the link in the description. In the box, you obviously get the lens, a metal front lens cap with the Thypoch logo, a push-on UV filter, which you adjust at the side to make it secure, and also a lens hood. The beauty of these filters is it's an A36 size, so it's the same size as the vintage Leica lenses. It means if you've got any vintage lenses, it's really easy to use the same filters as you just saw across multiple systems. The hood is also made of metal and also attaches via the push-on and then attachment grub screw on the side, like the old hoods in the old Leica lenses. I love this because I can use this lens on my old lenses as well as on the Thypoch lens. Another nice feature is both the UV filter and the hood have a little screw, and you can match that up to your aperture marking, and then that way when you change your aperture you basically know what aperture you're set at. I think it's a nice design. You can see it's a clickless aperture, so it might be good if you like video, and it's a very smooth operating setup. Here you can see I've already stolen the hood to use my Leica vintage lenses. I probably won't use it on the Thypoch. As mentioned, the lens hood is nicely made, but you really don't need it for this particular lens because the coatings of modern lenses are just so good. That being said, this is brilliant to kind of borrow and put it on your vintage Leica lenses instead. For fellow M camera users, what about rangefinder blockage or viewfinder blockage? You can see with the lens, without the lens hood, there's like no blockage at all. And that's how I use it because of the good coatings. You don't really need the hood. This lens has got a smooth focus throw and it looks like it's 1 meter, but it actually goes past. And if you read the lens spec, it's actually 0.9 minimum focus distance. It's also got the infinity stop and focus lock, so the old style tab design. I know some people might prefer the modern tabs, but it works well for my needs. There you can see the multi-coating finish. And in terms of the optical design, this is 6 elements in 4 groups. And this lens has got 12 aperture blades, which gives you basically round bokeh and almost all f-stops, which is really nice. You can see a close-up of the lens design. It's really nicely done, and you can see the multi-coating finish from the blue tint. Now, for those of you that know your Leica cameras, you may notice that my M3 looks slightly different. I've fitted it with a rewind crank, which makes it much quicker for rewinding film. Now, this can be bought from a link below. A company sent me one to try, and it's really nicely finished where you've got a milled finish to match the original rewind knob. They also come in a choice of 3 different colours. Now, I don't know if you use a Leica M2 or Leica M3, maybe the MA or the MP, but you finish your roll of film and it always seems to be that exact moment when something amazing is about to happen. I did a photo shoot a couple of days ago and my Hasselblad ran out of film and my M3 ran out of film. So and the model's hair was just like this perfect strand across one eye. I'm like, don't move, I need to change my film. And so I'm like frantically, it was just before this had come, so I was like frantically trying to turn the rewind knob so I could reload the film. And now I can just go, give me a second. And it's just so much easier and faster with this rewind crank. It's not the cheapest, but it is a nice addition if you want that additional feature for your Leica camera. If you follow me on social media, you know I'm a big fan of these collapsible lenses. I did this recent reel on Instagram with the Leica Sumar, the Leica Scimitar, and of course the brand new Thypoch. And I love the fact that a company's finally kind of making something that we need and making a collapsible 50mm lens. Now, how does the modern Thypoch compare to these vintage lenses? I have done full reviews on the vintage lenses, but let's now check the image quality of the new Thypoch. Okay, it's time to look at some pictures. Let's see what this lens can do. First up, let's look at the colours. So I had the M10 with me when I was in Italy, and so all these photos are M10 raw files using the Thypoch lens and probably using daylight white balance, which is what I normally use when I'm shooting with any digital camera. The sharpness out of camera is good, but obviously you don't post raw files, and that's now look at colour photos when I've added a preset to see how it look with like a final edit applied. Obviously I shoot black and white, so you can see the colour on the left is the raw unedit, and then how I would use the photos on the right with just a Mr. black and white preset added. If some of the black and white edits look better than reality, it's because I made a Mr. Leica red filter emulation preset. So based on my normal presets, but to emulate when using a red filter on, say, a film camera or a monochrome camera. It worked really well. I can put a link below if you're interested. Now, as you probably know, I normally shoot portraits. So how does this lens perform for portraits? Let's take a look. So this was during a workshop, and you can see on the left, you've got the original RAW file, and on the right, just with a Lightroom preset slapped on, and again, really clean results from this lens. In terms of vignetting, how's it compared? Wide open, you've got heavy vignetting until f4, and then it pretty much cleans up after that. You can see the same inside and outside. And here you can see a crop of the edge of an image to show you again the vignetting, and also compared to different 50mm lenses. Okay, now what about Sunstars? So if you shoot this lens wide open in the dark, you'll notice that there is like mini Sunstars from every point of light, but it's more of a spray than like a crisp Sunstar at all f-stops. It's not the best lens for Sunstars. Lens flare. So if you shoot at the sun, I tried really hard to get some lens flare to show you that it will actually flare, but in normal general use I didn't really see any flare. Actually, that's a bit of a lie. If you look in this picture, you can see the red flare around the sun. Okay, lens bokeh. Now I was pleasantly surprised with the bokeh, considering this is a new lens. Most new lenses are boring with round boring bokeh, but this lens has got more vintage style. You call it maybe rugby ball or cat eye bokeh, where it shapes the edge of the lens. So depending on the angle of the bokeh, you'll get more cat eye bokeh, and then you'll have circular bokeh in the center. This shows it better. Circular in the center, and then shaped at the edges depending on which edge it's on. Okay, lens sharpness. Yes, sharpness isn't the be all and end all, and it doesn't make or break a photo, but for me personally, I like to know that there's enough sharpness in a lens that I can then shoot it at that given aperture, especially when shooting on film. So let's check the results compared to some other popular 50mm lenses. Okay, so for sharpness I did two tests with the Leica SL, both with the camera mounted on a tripod. First I wanted to do center sharpness indoor at around 1 meter distance, similar to what I do for portraits. For this I use my Linhof camera as my beautiful model. If you're a new viewer, check out my 4x5 videos in addition to my normal Leica reviews. I then took a central crop and then compared the central crop first against different f-stops of the same lens, and next comparing the sharpness at f2 to other popular 50mm f2 lenses for Leica M-mount, the Summicron, the 50 Apo Voigtlander and the Elcan. Next I needed to do an infinity test, so I basically shot the photos out the window, again took a side crop this time. Here you can see the sharpness at different f-stops, and now again with the different lenses. It's actually a good performer. Here you can see the mid-zone sharpness. Sharpness is good, and it does improve as you stop down. It's not quite as sharp as the 50 Apo Voigtlander lens, but it is a very good performer nonetheless. Okay, what about the rendering? If you read the Thypoch website, it says rendering designed on classic vintage lenses or something like that. Is it really that classic and vintage looking compared to a modern lens? I'd say it's kind of a hybrid. I'd say it looks modern, but it has a touch of vintage in with the rendering. So it's better than more interesting than a modern lens, but it's definitely sharper and more, I want to say perfect, but it's more controlled than a original vintage lens. So it's somewhere in the middle. As with most lenses, the closer you get, the nicer the fall off and the beautiful rendering really comes out. And I do like the vintage style bokeh. How's it compared to a modern lens? So a student lent me his modern lens and I lent him my Thypoch. Here you can see his Lumix S51.4 modern lens next to my Thypoch. You can see the size difference, but also the difference in the bokeh and the rendering. It's pretty funny seeing this little Thypoch lens side by side with that monster Lumix 51.4. Yes, the Lumix 51.4 is excellent and sharp and modern and autofocus and all those things, but it's also modern and perfect and boring and overcorrected like any other modern lens. So for that reason, for my choice, I'd definitely go for the Thypoch and not the Lumix. Let's look at some more comparable images from the same workshop. So these are all now shot with my M10 and the Thypoch, all shot at wide open f2 on my Leica M10, just raw plus preset. And you can see it's more than sharp enough, but then you've also got a really nice fall off at the edges. This was another workshop on another day, also in London. And again, you can see it's kind of modern yet vintage in the same image, which is kind of a really nice balance. Definitely sharp enough. And to finish, here's a few non-portraits, again with the M10 and the Thypoch, probably at 5.6. Now, I know one question that some of you often have is, with certain lenses, are they good enough to work with the modern sensors? So because this lens is meant to be a little bit vintage, but it's also modern, how will it work on a 60 megapixel Leica M sensor? Let's take a look at some sample photos on the Leica M11 monochrome. So what we're looking at now is the M11 monochrome raw images. And if you zoom in, there's even good sharpness wide open at f2 in the raw image. Again, all of these are raw files unedited. Obviously they're black and white out of camera with a monochrome camera. Good sharpness, great tonality. And now here you can see the difference when you add a preset to a monochrome raw file. It just gives you a bit more pop and a bit more clarity to the images, kind of finishing polish before you post them to social media. So yeah, this is how I'd use the images if I was posting them. You may have seen some of these in my M11 monochrome video. Okay, so the final verdict. Can I recommend this lens? You can probably see from my rubbish poker face that I quite like this lens. It's not as smooth as a Summicron, and it's not as vintage as a vintage lens. And to my mind, it's a cross between the sharpness and modernness of a 50 Apo Voigtlander, but not quite as sharp and not quite as corrected. And maybe something more like a Zeiss planar sharpness looking rendering compared to the slightly more, I don't know, rounded, softer, yet sharp look of a Summicron lens design. I think a Summicron is more arty, and I think this is more, dare I say it, more clinical, but it's not boring either because it's got the nicer bokeh and the kind of imperfect Sunstars and all of those sorts of things. So it's a funny one. I like it, but I can't quite put words to it. If you love a smaller, lighter setup, get the Thypoch Eureka to make any existing camera a smaller, light-up carry-around camera, even on something like the SL. If you're used to big, heavy lenses, you'll absolutely love this lens. But for me, I'm going to be using it on my film cameras. I think for film is really the sweet spot for me because it gives a nice balance between sharp enough, yet the organic nature of shooting film. And it also, as I say, it's a great size to carry around all the time. I always need to fit as many cameras in my bag as possible for photo shoots. So if it's light and compact and gives image quality like this, wide open f2 on my M3, I'm a happy chappy. I love the fact that the Thypoch is as small as my collapsible lenses and the same size as my Elcan. So how's the Thypoch 50f2 compared to my favourite Leica Lens Lab 50f2? It's difficult. If you want to shoot at f2, maximum widest aperture on film, I'd go for the Thypoch. If you want more arty rendering, I'd go for the Leica Lens Lab. This has got heavier vignetting, softer corners, and it just looks way more arty. But if you just need sharpness at f2, the Thypoch is better. So I'm keeping both, and I'll use different ones for different applications, but for wide open portraits I'll probably be using the Thypoch on my M3. If I'm shooting the lens wide open at f2, if I'm shooting digital, I'd still use the Light Lens Lab Elcan for the nicer rendering, but on film I'd use the Thypoch for the improved sharpness at f2. The Thypoch rendering is definitely more modern than a lot of my other vintage 50mm lenses, but it's got good sharpness at f2, so I'm more than happy. How about a black version? Now if you read the spec, currently there's only a silver lens listed. Now for any of you with black Leica cameras, obviously we can't use a silver lens on a black camera. That would just be silly, wouldn't it? I'm saying obviously this with a smile. That being said, we do often prefer to have matching lenses on our matching cameras. So Thypoch, if you're listening, I would highly recommend releasing a black version of this lens to keep all the black M camera users happy. Is there an LTM mount version of this lens? Currently, if you look on the spec list, it's only available in M mount, but hopefully if we all ask enough times, they'll make us both black and a black LTM version to fit our black paint Leicas and any other screw mount cameras such as Canon rangefinder cameras and so on. Now I have already written to Thypoch to say, Thypoch, please make us a black copy, and please, please, please make us a screw mount copy. Now miracles can happen. If you think back to when TT Artisan released their 28 5.6 lens, that was only released in M mount originally, but eventually they made us a screw mount version of that lens, and it's fantastic. Hopefully Thypoch will do the same thing. If the demand is there, they'll make a screw mount version of the Thypoch Eureka 50 f2, and I think it will pair so well with the classic Leica 3 cameras. So fingers crossed, toes crossed. Please, Thypoch, if you're listening, we will use this lens if you make one. If you're looking for a compact 50mm everyday carry lens, look no further than the Thypoch Eureka. I can highly recommend it, and it will be glued to my Leica M3. I hope you enjoyed this video, and a big thanks to my amazing patrons. I can link reviews to the other Thypoch lenses next.